I was sitting in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina, staring at the envelope that had just been delivered by a process server, when I realized that my life was about to become significantly more complicated than I had ever imagined. The return address listed something called Meadowbrook Property Management, LLC, as the plaintiff in a lawsuit against me, demanding $25,000 in damages for alleged violations of community standards. The problem was, I had never heard of Meadowbrook Property Management, LLC, and I lived in a neighborhood called Sunset Ridge Estates. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I had bought my 3-bedroom colonial-style house in this quiet Charlotte suburb about 18 months earlier. The neighborhood was pleasant enough, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns, though the Homeowners Association had a reputation for being somewhat overzealous about enforcement. The HOA president was a woman named Patricia Whitmore, a 52-year-old former real estate agent who treated her volunteer position like she was running a Fortune 500 company. Patricia had shoulder-length blonde hair that she always wore in the same style, designer sunglasses that never seemed to leave the top of her head, and a wardrobe that consisted primarily of athletic wear, despite the fact that I had never seen her exercise. The trouble had started about 6 months after I moved in. I had installed solar panels on my roof without getting HOA approval first. In my defense, I had read through the covenants, conditions, and restrictions document when I purchased the house, and while it mentioned that exterior modifications required approval, there was nothing specifically prohibiting solar panels. In fact, North Carolina had passed laws making it illegal for HOAs to ban solar installations outright. I figured I was in the clear. Patricia disagreed. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning about a week after the installation was complete, wearing white capri pants and a pink polo shirt, her face already red with indignation before I even opened the door. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about those panels on your roof," she said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping past me into my entryway. "The Architectural Review Committee never approved those." "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I replied, trying to keep my tone civil. "I checked the CCRs before having them installed. There's nothing prohibiting solar panels, and state law actually protects homeowners' rights to install them." Her mouth tightened into a thin line. "The CCRs state that all exterior modifications require prior approval. You didn't get approval. That's a violation, plain and simple." "I'm happy to submit a retroactive application if that helps," I offered, though I was pretty sure she couldn't actually make me remove legally installed solar panels. "The committee will need to review it," she said, pulling out her phone and taking pictures of my entryway for reasons I could not fathom. "In the meantime, you're in violation, and violations carry fines of $100 per day." I felt my jaw clench. "Patricia, that's ridiculous. You can't fine me $100 a day for something that's legal under state law." "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heel and marching back out of my house. Over the following weeks, I submitted the application for approval, including documentation about North Carolina General Statute 22B20, which severely limited HOA restrictions on solar panels. The Architectural Review Committee, which consisted of Patricia and 2 of her friends from the neighborhood, denied my application anyway. Their stated reason was that the panels were aesthetically inconsistent with the neighborhood character. I consulted with a lawyer named David Chen, who had an office in downtown Charlotte. David was in his late 30s, wore rimless glasses, and had a reputation for handling HOA disputes. He looked over my documentation and shook his head. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he told me during our first meeting. "The state statute is pretty clear. HOAs can impose reasonable restrictions on solar installations, but they can't prohibit them. and they can't deny applications unless there are legitimate safety or structural concerns. Aesthetics alone isn't sufficient grounds for denial. So what do? I asked. Write them a letter citing the statute and informing them that you're not removing the panels and you won't be paying any fines. If they want to pursue it, they'll have to take you to court, and I'm confident we'd win. I followed David's advice and sent a certified letter to the HOA board. Patricia responded by increasing the fines to $250 per day and placing a lien on my property. When I called her to discuss it, she hung up on me. When I showed up at the next HOA board meeting to address the issue during the homeowner comment period, she had me escorted out by her husband, Richard, who was a large man with a crew cut who worked in construction. That was 4 months ago. Since then, Patricia and I had been locked in an increasingly hostile standoff. She would send me violation notices for the most trivial things imaginable. My trash can was visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though I had just brought it back from the curb and was planning to put it in the garage. My grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall, even though I had measured it myself and it was well within the specified range. A decorative garden gnome my girlfriend had bought me was deemed unapproved yard art and subject to fines. I documented everything, took photographs, kept copies of all correspondence, and generally tried to build a paper trail that would demonstrate Patricia's harassment. David assured me that if it ever went to court, the pattern of behavior would work in my favor, which brought me back to the envelope in my hand. I called David immediately. I just got served with a lawsuit, I told him, but it's not from the HOA, it's from some LLC I've never heard of called Meadowbrook Property Management. What are they claiming? David asked. I scanned through the complaint. It says they're a property management company that provides services to Sunset Ridge Estates, and that my violations have caused them financial harm and reputational damage. They're seeking $25,000 in compensatory damages plus attorney's fees. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's weird. I've dealt with your HOA before on another matter, and they've never mentioned using a management company. In fact, I'm pretty sure Patricia runs everything herself. That's what I thought too, I said. I've never seen any indication that there's a management company involved. All the correspondence I get comes directly from the HOA board. Forward me the complaint and all the attachments. I want to take a look at this. I scanned everything and emailed it to David, then sat back in my chair and tried to make sense of what was happening. Why would a property management company I had never heard of be suing me instead of the HOA itself? And why now, after months of back and forth that had never escalated beyond threatening letters and questionable fines? David called me back an hour later. Something's not right here. I looked up Meadowbrook Property Management LLC with the North Carolina Secretary of State. It was only registered 3 weeks ago. The registered agent is listed as a commercial registered agent service, which is pretty common, but there's no website, no business history, nothing. Can you find out who actually owns it? I asked. The LLC filing lists a manager, but it's just a name, Rebecca Morrison. I've never heard of her, and I can't find any connection between her and your HOA or your neighborhood. Over the next few days, David dug deeper while I tried to continue with my normal life, which was difficult given that I was apparently being sued for $25,000 by a mysterious entity. My girlfriend, Ashley, was understandably concerned. She worked as a nurse at Atrium Health and had been living with me for about 6 months. She had witnessed Patricia's escalating campaign of harassment and was just as baffled as I was by this new development. Could Patricia have hired a property management company just to sue you? Ashley asked one evening as we ate dinner. Like, maybe she convinced the HOA board to bring in professionals or something? I don't think so, I said. David checked, and there's no record of the HOA board voting to hire a management company. Plus, if they had, there would be a contract, invoices, some kind of paper trail. This LLC just appeared out of nowhere 3 weeks ago. This whole thing is insane, Ashley said, shaking her head. I still can't believe she's going to these lengths over solar panels. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. David filed a response denying all claims and asserting that the plaintiff lacked standing to sue me, since I had no contractual or business relationship with Meadowbrook Property Management, LLC. We requested discovery, hoping to get more information about who was actually behind this lawsuit. Discovery in a civil case is the process where both sides exchange information and documents relevant to the case. David submitted interrogatories, which are written questions that the other side has to answer under oath, and requests for production of documents. We asked for all documents related to Meadowbrook Property Management's business operations, any contracts with Sunset Ridge Estates, HOA, communications between Meadowbrook and the HOA, and the identity of all members and managers of the LLC. The responses we got back were vague and evasive. The attorney representing Meadowbrook Property Management was a solo practitioner named Gerald Hoffman, who had an office in a strip mall about 20 miles outside Charlotte. His answers to our interrogatories were mostly variations of Meadowbrook Property Management provides consulting and management services to homeowners associations in the Charlotte metro area, without any specific details. The document production consisted of copies of the HOA's CCRs, which I already had, and a few generic business documents that could have applied to any company. They're stonewalling us, David said during one of our strategy sessions, and Hoffman knows better. These responses are inadequate and he could get sanctioned for it. So what do? I asked. We file a motion to compel. We ask the judge to order them to provide proper responses to our discovery requests, and we start asking some harder questions about whether this LLC is even legitimate. David filed the motion to compel, and we got a hearing date about 2 weeks later. The hearing was held at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse in downtown Charlotte, a large modern building with tight security. I took the morning off work, where I was a software developer for a financial services company, and met David in the hallway outside the courtroom. Judge Andrea Martinez was presiding. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom and not tolerating games from attorneys. Gerald Hoffman was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with a worn briefcase and a slightly rumpled suit. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and a tired expression. David presented our motion, arguing that Meadowbrook's discovery responses were insufficient and that we were entitled to know basic information about the plaintiff's business operations and relationship to the HOA. Hoffman stood up and argued that Meadowbrook's business operations were proprietary and confidential, and that they had provided sufficient information to establish their standing to sue. Judge Martinez did not look impressed. Mr. Hoffman, your client is asking for $25,000 in damages from the defendant. The defendant is entitled to know who your client is, what business your client conducts, and what relationship your client has to the homeowners association in question. Your discovery responses don't answer these basic questions. Your Honor, with respect, Meadowbrook Property Management is a small business, and disclosing detailed information about its operations could harm its competitive position, Hoffman said. This is not a request for trade secrets, Mr. Hoffman. This is a request for basic corporate information that should be readily available. I'm granting the motion to compel. Your client has 2 weeks to provide complete responses to the interrogatories and document requests. If you fail to do so, I'll consider sanctions, up to and including dismissal of the case. Hoffman nodded stiffly and sat down. As we left the courtroom, David looked satisfied. That went well. Now let's see what they actually produce. 2 weeks later, we received a second round of discovery responses that were only marginally better than the first. There was still no contract between Meadowbrook and the HOA. There were no invoices, no payment records, no emails or correspondence. The identity of the LLC's members was listed as confidential for privacy reasons. David was furious. They're in violation of the court's order. We're going back to the judge. Before we could file another motion, though, something unexpected happened. David got a phone call from the clerk of court's office. When he called me afterward, his tone was different, excited in a way I had not heard before. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this." The court clerk flagged the Meadowbrook case for potential fraud. "What? How? Why?" I asked, barely able to process what he was saying. Apparently, one of the clerks in the civil division was processing some routine filings and noticed irregularities with the LLC registration that was attached to the original complaint. She did some cross-referencing and found discrepancies. She reported it to her supervisor, and they've flagged it for the judge and potentially for the district attorney's office. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. "I don't have all the details yet, but it looks like the LLC registration might have been falsified." The clerk is going to provide a written report to Judge Martinez, and there's going to be an emergency hearing. 3 days later, we were back in Judge Martinez's courtroom. This time, there were additional people present, including an assistant district attorney named Jennifer Kowalski and an investigator from the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. Judge Martinez called the hearing to order and looked at Hoffman. "Mr. Hoffman, the court has received information suggesting that Meadowbrook Property Management, LLC, may not be a legitimate business entity. Before we proceed, I need you to provide proof of your client's legal existence and your authority to represent them." Hoffman looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, I have the articles of organization that were filed with the Secretary of State." "The court has reviewed those articles, Mr. Hoffman, and there are concerns about their authenticity." "I'm going to hear from the Secretary of State's investigator." The investigator, a man in his 40s named Thomas Bradley, stood up and was sworn in. He testified that his office had received a referral from the court clerk's office regarding potential irregularities with Meadowbrook Property Management, LLC's registration. Upon investigation, they discovered that while an LLC by that name had been registered, the registration documents contained falsified information. Specifically, Bradley said, the registered agent listed on the Articles of Organization is a commercial registered agent service called Carolina Corporate Agents. "We contacted them, and they have no record of ever being engaged by Meadowbrook Property Management or anyone associated with it. Their name and address were used without authorization." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "What about the manager listed on the articles, Rebecca Morrison?" "We investigated that as well, Your Honor." Rebecca Morrison is a real person, but when we contacted her, she stated that she had never formed an LLC, never heard of Meadowbrook Property Management, and never gave anyone permission to use her name. She's actually a teacher in Raleigh and has no connection to property management or the HOA in question. The courtroom was silent for a moment. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and shock. Someone had created a fake company to sue me. Judge Martinez turned to Hoffman. "Mr. Hoffman, did you verify the legitimacy of your client before filing this lawsuit?" Hoffman stood up slowly. He looked pale. "Your Honor, I was contacted by someone who identified themselves as a representative of Meadowbrook Property Management. They provided me with what appeared to be legitimate corporate documents and retained me to file this lawsuit. I had no reason to believe the documents were falsified." "Who contacted you?" Judge Martinez asked. I received a phone call from a woman who said her name was Rebecca Morrison. She said she was the manager of the LLC. We met once at a coffee shop to discuss the case, and she paid me a retainer in cash. Can you describe this woman? Jennifer Kowalski, the assistant district attorney, asked. Hoffman thought for a moment. She was middle-aged, blonde hair, maybe early 50s. She wore sunglasses inside, which I thought was odd. She seemed very agitated about the case, very insistent that we move forward quickly. I felt my heart start to pound. David and I exchanged a glance. That description sounded exactly like Patricia Whitmore. Your Honor, David said, standing up. I'd like to note for the record that the description Mr. Hoffman just provided matches the physical appearance of Patricia Whitmore, who is the president of Sunset Ridge Estates, HOA, and who has been engaged in a prolonged dispute with my client over the solar panel installation that forms the basis of this lawsuit. Judge Martinez made a note. Mr. Hoffman, do you have any contact information for the person who retained you? Just a phone number, Your Honor. I've tried calling it several times since the court issued the order to compel, but it goes straight to voicemail and the mailbox is full. Jennifer Kowalski spoke up. Your Honor, based on what we've heard today, it appears that someone created a fraudulent LLC and used it to file a frivolous lawsuit. This is potentially criminal fraud, identity theft, and abuse of the court system. The district attorney's office would like to open a criminal investigation. Granted, Judge Martinez said. As for this civil case, it's dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiff entity does not legally exist and therefore has no standing to sue. Mr. Hoffman, you should consider yourself fortunate that it appears you were also a victim of fraud here, but you need to be more careful about vetting your clients in the future. Yes, Your Honor, Hoffman said quietly, this hearing is adjourned. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt like I was in a daze. Did that really just happen? Did Patricia really create a fake company to sue me? It looks that way, David said, but now it's a criminal matter. The DA's office will investigate, and if they can prove Patricia was behind it, she'll be facing serious charges. Over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded. Jennifer Kowalski was thorough and methodical. She obtained phone records, bank records, and surveillance footage. The phone number that had been used to contact Gerald Hoffman was traced to a prepaid cell phone that had been purchased at a convenience store in Charlotte. The store's security footage showed a blonde woman in sunglasses making the purchase with cash. The footage was grainy, but when investigators showed it to people who knew Patricia Whitmore, multiple people confirmed it looked like her. The cash that Patricia had used to pay Hoffman's retainer was harder to trace, but investigators found that Patricia had made several large ATM withdrawals from her personal bank account in the days before she met with Hoffman. The amounts matched almost exactly the retainer that Hoffman said he had received. Most damning of all was the computer evidence. Investigators executed a search warrant on Patricia's home and seized her laptop. A forensic examination revealed that she had used her home computer to access the North Carolina Secretary of State's website and file the Articles of Organization for Meadowbrook Property Management, LLC. She had used Rebecca Morrison's name and personal information, which she had apparently obtained from public records. Rebecca Morrison had once filed a complaint with the state about a different HOA in Raleigh, and her information was in a public database. I learned most of these details from Jennifer Kowalski, who kept David and me informed as the investigation progressed. She explained that Patricia would likely be charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, identity theft, and making false statements to a government agency. Why did she do it this way? I asked during one of our meetings at the DA's office. Why create a fake company instead of just having the HOA sue me directly? Jennifer considered the question. My theory is that she knew the HOA didn't have a strong legal case because of the state statute protecting solar panel installations. If the HOA sued you and lost, it would make her look bad and could potentially expose the HOA to liability. But if she could sue you through a shell company, she could harass you and cost you money without directly involving the HOA. If the fake company lost, it wouldn't reflect on her or the HOA board. And if by some chance the fake company won, she could collect the judgment and the HOA would benefit indirectly. That's incredibly devious, Ashley said. She had come with me to this meeting for moral support. It is, Jennifer agreed. It also shows premeditation and sophistication, which will factor into sentencing if she's convicted. Patricia Whitmore was arrested on a Wednesday morning in early September. The arrest was covered by local news because it was such an unusual case. The footage showed Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face red and furious, shouting at the officers that this was all a misunderstanding and that I had started everything by violating HOA rules. The arrest sent shockwaves through Sunset Ridge Estates. Many of my neighbors had no idea about the extent of Patricia's vendetta against me. Some of them had thought she was overly strict, but generally meant well. The revelation that she had committed fraud and identity theft to pursue a personal grudge changed a lot of people's perceptions. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. They also issued a formal apology to me and voted to rescind all the fines that Patricia had levied against me for the solar panels and various other alleged violations. The new HOA president was a retired accountant named Frank Delgado, who seemed much more reasonable. He called me personally to apologize and to assure me that the HOA would not be pursuing any further action regarding my solar panels. I want you to know that most of us on the board had no idea how far Patricia had taken things, Frank told me. We knew she was strict, but we didn't know she was harassing you to this degree, and we certainly didn't know about the fake lawsuit. I appreciate that, Frank, I said. I never had a problem with the HOA as an organization. This was always about Patricia's personal crusade. Patricia's husband, Richard, filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. According to neighborhood gossip, he had been completely unaware of what Patricia was doing and was humiliated by the entire situation. He moved out of their house and in with his brother across town. The criminal case moved forward. Patricia was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her attorney, a defense lawyer named Martin Prescott, tried to argue that Patricia had mental health issues and had become obsessed with HOA enforcement to an irrational degree. He requested a psychological evaluation, which the judge granted. The evaluation determined that Patricia did not have any mental illness that would have prevented her from understanding that her actions were wrong. She was found competent to stand trial. The psychologist's report did note that Patricia had narcissistic personality traits and an excessive need for control, but those were personality characteristics, not mental illnesses that would serve as a defense. The case went to trial in February. I was called to testify about the history of the dispute between Patricia and me. I described the solar panel installation, Patricia's escalating campaign of harassment, the frivolous violation notices, and finally the lawsuit from the fake LLC. David also testified about his investigation into Meadowbrook Property Management and the discovery of its fraudulent nature. Gerald Hoffman testified about being approached by someone claiming to be Rebecca Morrison and being provided with what appeared to be legitimate corporate documents. The real Rebecca Morrison testified via video conference from Raleigh, confirming that she had never formed the LLC and had never given anyone permission to use her name. The forensic computer analyst testified about finding evidence on Patricia's laptop that she had filed the LLC registration using Rebecca Morrison's identity. A handwriting expert testified that the signature on the articles of organization appeared to be forged. The prosecution's case was comprehensive and damning. Patricia's defense was essentially that she had been trying to protect the neighborhood's property values and had made some mistakes in judgment, but had never intended to commit fraud. The jury did not find this convincing. After 3 days of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: fraud, identity theft, and making false statements to a government agency. Patricia showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but her attorney put his hand on her shoulder. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Patricia remained free on bond. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had become a recluse, barely leaving her house except for meetings with her attorney. At the sentencing hearing, the judge took into account Patricia's lack of prior criminal history, but also emphasized the seriousness of her crimes and the calculated nature of her actions. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to cover my legal fees and the costs of the investigation. "Miss Whitmore," the judge said before imposing sentence, "you held a position of trust in your community as HOA president. Instead of exercising that trust responsibly, you abused it to pursue a personal vendetta. You committed identity theft against an innocent teacher who had nothing to do with your dispute. You defrauded an attorney and wasted the court's time and resources. You created a fictitious business entity and filed a fraudulent lawsuit. These are not minor mistakes in judgment. These are serious crimes that strike at the integrity of our legal system. I hope you will use your time in prison to reflect on your actions and to develop a more appropriate sense of perspective about what actually matters in life." Patricia was taken into custody immediately to begin serving her sentence. As the bailiffs led her away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was finally over, and sadness that someone had let their need for control destroy their entire life over something as trivial as solar panels. After the sentencing, David and I went to lunch at a restaurant in Uptown Charlotte. We sat on the patio and ordered burgers and beers. "Well, that was quite a journey," David said, raising his glass. "I've handled a lot of HOA disputes, but I've never seen anything quite like this." "I still can't believe it went that far," I said. "Who commits felonies over solar panels?" "Someone who's more invested in being right than in being reasonable," David said. "The thing about people like Patricia is that they can't tolerate any challenge to their authority." When you pushed back against her interpretation of the HOA rules, it wasn't just about the solar panels anymore. It became about her ego and her need to win. "Well, she definitely lost," I said. Over the following months, life in Sunset Ridge Estates gradually returned to normal. Frank Delgado turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined the architectural review process, made the rules clearer and more reasonable, and generally brought a spirit of cooperation rather than confrontation to the role. Several of my neighbors actually complimented me on how nice my solar panels looked and asked for recommendations on installation companies. Ashley and I got engaged that summer. We planned a small wedding for the following spring. One evening, as we sat on our back deck watching the sunset, she brought up the whole Patricia saga. "Do you ever regret installing those solar panels?" she asked. "I mean, if you had known all the trouble it would cause, would you have done it differently?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said finally. "I didn't do anything wrong. I installed legal, environmentally friendly technology on my own house." If I had backed down just because Patricia threw a tantrum, What kind of precedent would that set? She would have just found something else to target, and she would have learned that bullying and harassment work. That's true, Ashley said, and at least now she can't bully anyone else. Exactly. I like to think that maybe, in some weird way, holding my ground actually helped the neighborhood in the long run. Patricia needed to be stopped, and if my solar panels were what finally exposed her behavior, then I guess it was worth it. The restitution payments started coming in about 6 months after sentencing. Patricia had been ordered to pay approximately $38,000 to cover my legal fees, court costs, and the expenses of the investigation. She was making payments in installments from what remained of her assets after the divorce settlement and the sale of her house. I put the money into a savings account that Ashley and I designated for our future home improvements. I did wonder sometimes what Patricia's life was like in prison. I imagined her trying to maintain some sense of control and authority in an environment where she had none. I did not feel happy about her imprisonment, but I did feel that justice had been served. She had made choices that had consequences, and she was facing those consequences. About a year after Patricia's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Patricia herself, written from the women's correctional facility where she was serving her sentence. The letter was short and handwritten on lined notebook paper. "Mr. Thompson," it began. "I am writing to apologize for my actions. I let my anger and my need to be right override my judgment and my ethics. I caused you significant stress and expense over something that, in hindsight, was not worth fighting about. I also hurt other people, including Rebecca Morrison, who did nothing to deserve having her identity stolen. I am using my time here to work with a counselor on understanding why I acted the way I did, and how I can make better choices in the future. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused and I am truly sorry. Patricia Whitmore." I read the letter several times. It seemed genuine, though I had no way of knowing for sure if Patricia had really changed, or if this was just something her counselor had encouraged her to do as part of her rehabilitation. I showed the letter to Ashley. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to write back," I said. "I'm going to tell her that I accept her apology and that I hope she's able to build a better life when she gets out." "Really? After everything she put you through?" "She's already facing the consequences of her actions," I said. "She's in prison, her marriage is over, her reputation is destroyed. What good does it do for me to hold on to anger? If she's genuinely trying to change, then maybe something positive can come out of this whole mess." I wrote a brief reply acknowledging her apology and wishing her well. I did not say that I forgave her, because I was not sure that I fully did. But I did say that I held no ill will toward her and hoped she would make better choices in the future. I mailed the letter and did not expect to hear from her again. Patricia was released from prison after serving 14 months of her 18-month sentence, getting credit for good behavior. I heard that she moved to another state to live with her sister and start over somewhere where nobody knew about her past. I hoped that was true and that she was able to rebuild her life in a healthier way. As for me and Ashley, we got married on a beautiful Saturday in April at a venue overlooking Lake Norman. The wedding was small and intimate, with about 60 guests including family and close friends. Several of my neighbors from Sunset Ridge Estates attended, including Frank Delgado and his wife. David Chen came with his partner, and we spent part of the reception laughing about the absurdity of the fake LLC lawsuit. During the reception, Frank pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. "This is from the HOA board," he said. "We wanted to do something to make up for everything that happened." Inside the envelope was a formal resolution from the board officially commending me for my patience and professionalism during the dispute with Patricia, and a gift certificate for a very nice restaurant in Charlotte. I was touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do this," I told Frank. "We wanted to," he said. "You handled a difficult situation with grace, and you helped expose behavior that was hurting the whole community. We're better off now because you stood your ground." The solar panels continued to work beautifully, reducing our electricity bills and our carbon footprint. On sunny days, we actually generated more power than we used, and the excess went back into the grid, earning us credits from the power company. I sometimes thought about how Patricia had been so determined to make me remove them, and how that determination had ultimately destroyed her life, while the panels just kept quietly generating clean energy like nothing had ever happened. A couple of years after the trial, I was contacted by a journalist writing a book about HOA disputes that had gone wrong. She wanted to include a chapter about my case with Patricia. I agreed to be interviewed, figuring that maybe telling the story publicly could help other people who were dealing with unreasonable HOA boards. The interview was extensive, covering everything from the initial solar panel installation through the fake LLC lawsuit and Patricia's eventual conviction. The journalist was particularly interested in the court clerk who had flagged the fraudulent LLC registration. "That clerk probably doesn't get enough credit for what she did," the journalist said. "If she hadn't noticed those irregularities and reported them, Patricia might have gotten away with it." She was right. I had never actually met the court clerk who had started the investigation. I reached out to David to see if he could find out who it was so I could thank her personally. David made some calls and eventually got me a name: Linda Marshall, a clerk in the civil division who had been working at the courthouse for almost 20 years. I called the courthouse and asked to speak with Linda Marshall. When she came on the line, I introduced myself and explained why I was calling. "I just wanted to thank you for catching the fraud in my case," I said. "If you hadn't flagged those irregularities, I might still be dealing with that fake lawsuit." Linda laughed. "Oh, I remember that case. It was one of the stranger things I've seen in all my years here. I just happened to notice that the registered agent information looked off when I was processing some filings. I've seen enough legitimate business registrations to know what they should look like, and something about that one didn't seem right." "Well, your attention to detail made a huge difference in my life," I said. "Thank you." "You're welcome, Mr. Thompson. I'm glad it worked out for you." It was a small conversation, but it reminded me that sometimes justice depends on dedicated professionals doing their jobs carefully and thoroughly. Linda Marshall could have just processed the filing without looking too closely. She could have dismissed her concerns as none of her business. But she took the time to investigate, and that made all the difference. The book that included my story was published about a year later. It was called When Good Neighborhoods Go Bad: HOA Horror Stories from Across America. My chapter was titled The Fake LLC Lawsuit. Reading the story in print was surreal. It laid out all the facts clearly and objectively, and seeing it presented that way made me realize just how bizarre the whole situation had been. The book got some media attention, and I did a few interviews with local news outlets about my experience. The story resonated with people, because so many homeowners had their own frustrating experiences with HOA boards. I received emails from people all over the country sharing their own stories of HOA overreach and thanking me for standing up against it. One email in particular stood out. It was from a woman in Arizona who was being harassed by her HOA over a flagpole in her front yard. She had been ready to give up and remove the flagpole just to make the harassment stop, but reading about my case inspired her to keep fighting. She consulted with an attorney, cited state laws protecting homeowners' rights to display flags, and eventually prevailed. She credited my story with giving her the courage to stand her ground. That email made me realize that what had happened with Patricia, as painful and frustrating as it had ultimately become something meaningful. It had exposed fraud, led to criminal prosecution of someone who had abused their authority, and inspired other people to stand up for their rights. In a strange way, Patricia's worst impulses had led to positive outcomes that never would have happened if she had just been reasonable from the beginning. Ashley and I eventually started a family. Our daughter, Emma, was born on a crisp October morning, and our son, Nathan, followed 2 years later. They grew up in the house with the solar panels, playing in the backyard and riding their bikes around Sunset Ridge Estates. The neighborhood remained peaceful under Frank Delgado's leadership, and then under the leadership of subsequent presidents who followed his reasonable approach. Sometimes, when I was out in the yard with the kids, and I looked up at those solar panels on the roof, I thought about everything they represented. They were functional technology that reduced our carbon footprint and saved us money. But they were also a symbol of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. They were a reminder that rules and regulations should serve the community, not enable petty tyrants. And they were a testament to the fact that sometimes justice does prevail, even when the odds seem stacked against you. I never regretted installing those solar panels. And I never regretted refusing to back down when Patricia tried to bully me into removing them. The experience taught me valuable lessons about courage, perseverance, and the importance of principled resistance to unreasonable authority. It also connected me with good people like David Chen, Frank Delgado, and Linda Marshall, who helped ensure that justice was served. Years later, when Emma was old enough to ask questions about why we had solar panels when most of our neighbors did not, I told her an age-appropriate version of the story. I explained that sometimes people disagree about rules, and that it's important to stand up for yourself when you know you're right, but to always do it respectfully and through proper channels. "Did the mean lady ever say sorry?" Emma asked. "She did," I told her, and I told her that I hoped she would make better choices in the future. "Did she?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I hope so." It was the truth. I genuinely did hope that Patricia had found a way to rebuild her life and become a better person. Not for my sake, but for hers and for anyone else who might cross her path in the future. People are capable of change, even people who make terrible choices. I wanted to believe that Patricia's time in prison, and the loss of everything she had valued, had taught her something important about perspective and priorities. As I write this now, more than a decade after the whole saga began, I can look back on it with a sense of peace. The anger and frustration I felt during those months of harassment have faded. What remains is a sense of gratitude for the life I have built, the family I have created, and the community that surrounded me during a difficult time. The solar panels are still there on the roof, still generating clean energy, still serving as a quiet reminder of a strange chapter in my life. They have required minimal maintenance over the years, and the technology has only improved. I have recommended solar installation to several neighbors, and a number of homes in Sunset Ridge Estates now have panels of their own. The Architectural Review Committee, under Frank's guidance and his successors, streamlined the approval process for solar installations, making it easy and straightforward for homeowners who want to make environmentally responsible choices. The legal precedent set by my case and Patricia's prosecution has also had broader implications. David has told me that he has used the case in other HOA disputes to demonstrate the limits of HOA authority and the consequences of fraudulent behavior. A few law schools have even included the case in their curriculum as an example of identity theft and fraud in a civil litigation context. I have stayed in touch with David over the years. He has become not just my attorney but a friend. We get together every few months for lunch or drinks, and we still sometimes laugh about the absurdity of someone creating a fake LLC to sue over solar panels. He has continued to build his practice representing homeowners in disputes with HOAs, and he has become something of a local expert on the subject. "Your case really put me on the map," he told me once. After Patricia's prosecution, I started getting calls from homeowners all over the state who were dealing with unreasonable HOA boards. "I've been able to help a lot of people because of the attention your case received." That felt good to hear. Something positive had come from the conflict, something that helped other people facing similar situations. I also stayed in touch with Frank Delgado until he moved to Florida to be closer to his grandchildren. Before he left, he told me that serving as HOA president after Patricia had been one of the most rewarding experiences of his retirement. "I got to help rebuild trust in the HOA and show people that it could be a force for good in the community rather than a source of stress," he said. And a lot of that came from seeing how badly Patricia had damaged that trust and being determined to do better. The neighborhood itself has thrived. Property values have increased steadily, not because of strict enforcement of aesthetic rules, but because Sunset Ridge Estates has developed a reputation as a friendly, welcoming community with reasonable governance. New families have moved in, and many of them have told me they specifically chose the neighborhood because they heard it had a sensible HOA that did not micromanage homeowners. As for the fake LLC, Meadowbrook Property Management LLC was officially dissolved by the Secretary of State's office after Patricia's conviction. The registration was permanently marked in the state's database as fraudulent, and Rebecca Morrison's name was cleared from any association with it. I heard that Rebecca considered suing Patricia for damages related to the identity theft, but ultimately decided it was not worth the time and stress. She just wanted to move on with her life, which I completely understood. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wonder what would have occurred if I had just backed down at the beginning. What if I had removed the solar panels when Patricia first demanded it? I would have saved myself a lot of stress and legal fees. But I also would have sent the message that bullying and unreasonable demands work. Patricia would have continued to abuse her authority, probably escalating her behavior with other homeowners. The fraud might never have been discovered, and I would have lost something important: my sense of integrity and my willingness to stand up for principles that matter. The experience also strengthened my relationship with Ashley. Going through something that difficult together, supporting each other through the stress and uncertainty, brought us closer. She never wavered in her belief that I was doing the right thing, and her support meant everything to me during those months when it felt like Patricia's harassment would never end. Our children are growing up in a home where they see their parents making principled choices and standing up for what's right. That's a value we try to instill in them, not through lectures but through example. When Nathan came home from school upset because a classmate was bullying him, we talked about the importance of standing up to bullies while also being kind and giving people chances to change. It was a lesson I had learned firsthand through my experience with Patricia. The story of the fake LLC lawsuit has become a bit of a legend in Sunset Ridge Estates. New homeowners sometimes hear about it and ask me if it's really true. I confirm that it is, and I usually end up sharing the highlights of what happened. Most people are shocked that anyone would go to such lengths over solar panels, but they also appreciate knowing that our HOA learned from that experience and became better because of it. I have also become more active in HOA governance myself. I serve on the Architectural Review Committee now, helping to evaluate requests for modifications and improvements. I try to approach every request with common sense and reasonableness, always asking myself whether a proposed change would actually harm the community or just offend someone's personal aesthetic preferences. I think about Patricia sometimes when I'm reviewing applications, and I use her example as a cautionary tale of what happens when personal preferences become confused with community standards. The solar panels themselves have exceeded every expectation. They have been operational for over a decade now, and they have generated significantly more energy than I initially projected. The money we have saved on electricity bills has more than paid for the installation costs, and we are now seeing pure savings every month. The environmental impact has been meaningful too. Our household carbon footprint has decreased substantially, and I feel good knowing that we are doing our small part to address climate change. I have also become an advocate for renewable energy in the community. I have given presentations at HOA meetings and community events about the benefits of solar power, both environmental and economic. Several neighbors have installed panels after hearing me speak, and I am always happy to share my experience and recommend installation companies. The relationship between my family and the HOA has been positive ever since Frank took over as president, and his successors continued his approach. We pay our dues on time, we maintain our property according to reasonable standards, and we participate in community events. The HOA, in turn, treats us with respect and does not micromanage our choices about our own home. It is the kind of functional, healthy relationship that an HOA should have with its members. I have thought many times about the court clerk, Linda Marshall, and her crucial role in uncovering the fraud. It is a reminder that our justice system depends on people at every level doing their jobs with integrity and attention to detail. Judges and attorneys get most of the credit when justice is served, but court clerks, investigators, paralegals, and other support staff are often the ones who notice the details that make the difference between truth and deception. The experience has also given me a deeper appreciation for the legal system itself, despite its flaws and frustrations. Yes, the process was slow and expensive. Yes, there were moments when I wondered if justice would ever be served, but ultimately the system worked. The fraud was discovered, the perpetrator was held accountable, and I was vindicated. That does not always happen, and I am grateful that it happened in my case. Patricia served her time and, as far as I know, started over in another state. I have no contact with her and do not know how her life has turned out. Part of me hopes she found peace and perspective. Part of me will always wonder if she understood the magnitude of what she had done and why it was so wrong. But mostly, I just hope she is no longer hurting people. The journalist who wrote about my case in her book sent me a copy when it was published, and I keep it on my bookshelf. Every so often, I take it down and read through the chapter about the fake LLC lawsuit. It is strange to see my life reduced to a series of facts and events on the page, but it is also validating to have the story told accurately and to know that other people can learn from what happened. My career has flourished in the years since the lawsuit. I have been promoted twice at the financial services company where I work, and I now lead a team of developers working on innovative projects. The skills I developed during the conflict with Patricia, things like attention to detail, documentation, and persistence in the face of adversity, have served me well professionally. Ashley has advanced in her nursing career as well, specializing in pediatric care. She often comes home with stories about the children she works with, and those stories remind both of us of what really matters in life. Compared to the serious health challenges that some of those children face, disputes over solar panels seem trivial indeed. We have built a good life in Charlotte, in our home in Sunset Ridge Estates, under the roof with the solar panels that started everything. We have raised our children here, made friends here, and become part of a community that we care about. The difficult chapter with Patricia is now just one part of our larger story, a challenge we faced and overcame together. As I finish writing this account, I am sitting in my home office, the same room where I first opened that envelope from Meadowbrook Property Management LLC so many years ago. The afternoon sun is streaming through the window, and I know that up on the roof, the solar panels are converting that sunlight into clean energy that powers our home. It is a small daily victory, a quiet reminder that standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, is always worth it in the end.